Red dust curled upward beneath the heavy tires as the first road grader pushed forward through the heart of Kugri, a village forgotten by time. Generations had watched their feet disappear into the dry powder of the earth, but today, metal kissed dirt. Men, women, and children lined both sides, eyes wide, hands shading their brows, watching the machinery tear through the silence. Elder Isufu leaned on his carved cane and whispered, "Since I was a boy, never have we seen this." The air smelled of oil and heat and something else, hope. For too long, Burkina Faso had lived under the weight of instability. It wasn't just poverty. It was the silence of forgotten children in broken schools, the helpless sighs of mothers unable to find medicine, the parched lands where crops failed again and again. Security had fractured. Foreign powers played chess across its borders. Roads were more memory than matter. Many had begun to accept the idea that progress was a dream meant for others. Then, from within the army's ranks, came a name that echoed across dusty plains and concrete corridors alike. Ibrahim Traoré, a captain, barely in his mid-30s, quiet, disciplined, visionary. Where others saw chaos, he saw blueprints. Where others blamed, he planned. Some called it audacity. Others called it destiny. He didn't rise through politics. He wasn't shaped by boardrooms or bulletproof SUVs. He was shaped by the front lines, by standing in villages where children drank from puddles, where young men whispered about leaving or fighting, and where silence had replaced speeches. When he assumed leadership, the world raised its brows. Another military man, they thought. Another bold promise. The headlines ranged from skeptical to mocking, but Traoré didn't respond to microphones or editorials. He responded with motion. Within months, whispers of something different began to surface, not just words, but actions. A plan, not one project or two. 30. Infrastructure, health, education, water, technology, agriculture, defense. Every sector touched. It wasn't gradual. It was massive, ambitious, a declaration. Locals first heard it in town halls and morning radio. Then they began seeing changes. Surveyors mapping dry lands, engineers walking school ruins, crates arriving by truck under military escort. They weren't foreign-funded press shows. These were boots-in-the-dust missions, locally run, nationally, coordinated. Still, outside the borders, skepticism swelled. Analysts called it idealistic. Some said the economy couldn't support it. Others suggested it was all for optics. They didn't believe a landlocked nation, once dismissed as irrelevant, could generate this scale of movement. Not in 1 year. Not led by a man under 40, but on the ground, things were already shifting. In Bulsa, children chased the shadows of solar panels being installed. In Dori, a small clinic reopened with a full stock of vaccines. In the hills near Bobo Dioulasso, bulldozers broke stone for a new rail line, aiming to connect the nation like never before. And now in Kugri, the dirt road that once choked ambulances and isolated farmers was being tamed, stretched, and reborn. Traoré didn't speak often, but when he did, his words spread like fire through dry fields. During a quiet visit to a project site near Ziniare, standing among workers in stained overalls, he looked past the cameras and said just one line. "They call us poor. We call ourselves builders." That line didn't just echo across social feeds and press briefings. It etched itself into the foundation of every new road, bridge, and railway emerging across Burkina Faso. And nowhere was that more vivid than on the southern plains, where steel rails now glinted under the rising sun for the first time in the country's post-colonial history. At 6:04 a.m., a deep rumble rolled across the countryside. The villagers of Kupela paused their morning routines. As the first locomotive roared into view, red and gold, like a flame streaking across the horizon. Dust lifted, roosters scattered, and on board, passengers clung to the windows, faces pressed against glass, watching farmlands blur into memory as they headed toward Ouagadougou. Inside one carriage sat Musa, a maize farmer who had never left his province. His hands, calloused and cracked from decades of tilling soil, gripped a burlap bag filled with samples of this year's yield. Beside him sat his teenage son, Adama, eyes wide, holding a hand-drawn map of where they were going. "Used to walk 5 hours just to find someone to sell my grain to," Musa said to the stranger beside him. "Now I will reach the capital before the sun climbs halfway." A few rows back, Awa, a mother of 3, cradled a small cooler wrapped in cloth. Inside, insulin. Her youngest child had just been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. In the past, the medicine could spoil during the 2-day journey to the regional hospital. Now, the train would carry her there in 3 hours. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered, eyes shining. These were not isolated miracles. They were the consequences of connection, of Projects 1 through 5 in motion. Project 1, the Eastern Corridor Highway, a 620-kilometer stretch of road once riddled with potholes the size of bathtubs, now layered with asphalt smooth enough for ambulances to glide across. What was once a 12-hour ordeal from Fada to Ouagadougou had become a 4-hour drive. Project 2, the Koudougou Suspension Bridge, spanning the Mohune River, a monstrous structure that rose like a silver spine out of the jungle. Before, during the rains, trucks waited days for water levels to drop. Now, they crossed in minutes. Project 3, Rural Access Roads Initiative. Dozens of feeder roads stitched into remote zones, giving villages names on maps for the first time. Goods moved. Teachers arrived. Aid flowed. Project 4, Ouagadougou Central Rail Hub, a reimagined station pulsing with life. Not just steel and stone, but digital screens, solar roofs, and local vendors selling roasted groundnuts to passengers. Project 5, the North-South Economic Line, a major rail artery running from the mining towns in the north to the grain-rich southern belt. It wasn't just transporting goods, it was redistributing opportunity. On one construction site near Kaya, 2 workers paused mid-shift, sweat soaking through their orange vests. "You believe this?" one asked, tossing a wrench to his partner. "I believe what I see." The other grinned, nodding toward the rising bridge behind them. Traoré doesn't talk, he builds. Not far from them, Aminata, a 26-year-old civil engineer, stood beside, her survey gear. She had studied in Dakar but returned home when she heard about the national push. "Before this, I thought my degree would only get me a desk job. Now I'm building bridges my children will cross." She paused, glancing at the steel beams above. "You can't understand what this means to a girl from a village with no road." Across the country, stories like hers blossomed like wildflowers after the rain. In Dédougou, a truck driver named Kader loaded fresh mango crates onto his vehicle, whistling to himself. "No more back-breaking detours. Now I get paid faster and sleep in my own bed." From marketplace to hospital, from classroom to capital, the daily rhythms of life began to change. Travel times shrank. Food stayed fresh. Sick children reached clinics. Youths traveled for education. For the first time in decades, mobility meant possibility. And these changes weren't happening in isolation. They were woven together. The roads fed the markets. The bridges fed the roads. The railways fed the cities. And behind it all was a singular vision: connect every Burkinabe to the promise of their nation. Yet for all the steel and stone, the true infrastructure being laid was invisible: trust. People began to believe again, not just in leadership but in themselves, in their hands, their skills, their ability to shape their own futures. As the sun dipped low and the first train pulled into Ouagadougou Central Station, an elderly man stepped off and kissed the ground. A journalist nearby asked, "Why?" He replied, "Because now my village is no longer lost." And somewhere in the capital, President Ibrahim Traoré reviewed a new batch of blueprints, this time for a national network of solar-powered health centers. The connections had been made. Now came the lifelines. The train pulled into Ouagadougou as dusk settled over the capital. In the warm orange haze, the skyline shimmered with something new: light. Not the flicker of kerosene or the dull glow of outdated generators, but steady, clean, reliable power. President Ibrahim Traoré stared out the window of his modest office. Blueprints for the next phase of his nation's transformation spread across his desk. He didn't look at them. His gaze was fixed on the horizon where, for the first time in living memory, electricity pulsed like veins across the country's body. The connections had been made. Now it was time to bring power to the people. That power, literal and symbolic, came from the bold implementation of Projects 6 through 10, each designed to rip Burkina Faso from the grip of energy poverty and propel it into an era of independence and innovation. Project 6, the Ziniare Solar Megafield, a 250-hectare sea of solar panels, soaking up the Sahelian sun and feeding power into the national grid. It stood as both an energy source and a national monument, proof that Africa could leapfrog fossil dependency with homegrown solutions. Project 7, Rural Electrification Initiative, targeting over 1,000 villages where poles and wires now traced once forgotten paths. In places where evening once meant darkness, light now spilled from homes, schools, and mosques. Project 8, Hydro Revival Program, revamping outdated hydro plants on the Compiègne and Bagre rivers. With modern turbines and smart flow management, what was once a trickle now surged steadily, providing 24/7 electricity to regions that had known only blackouts. Project 9, Community Mini-Grids, small solar-powered stations run by trained local operators. In Dano, Po, and Djibo, women like Madame Yassine, a former market seller, now manage the local grid, employing young technicians and generating communal income. Project 10, National Battery Storage Network, massive lithium storage banks to keep excess solar energy accessible during night hours. No more outages, no more waiting for the sun to rise. And for many Burkinabe, the impact wasn't felt through technical specs. It was lived in quiet, intimate moments. In the village of Sabu, on the southern frontier, dusk had always arrived, with resignation. Parents huddled around smoky lamps. Children's schoolbooks remained closed. Radios went silent. The world beyond vanished into the dark. But tonight was different. As the sun dipped below the hills, a single light bulb flickered on in a mud-brick schoolhouse. Then another, and another. Across the village, homes began to glow softly, like fireflies, blinking to life. People emerged from their homes murmuring in disbelief. Children laughed, mothers wept. And over in one hut, a boy named Issoufou opened his textbook and began to read aloud, his voice crisp, confident, bathed in new light. His father, Mahamadou, stood at the door, staring at a small television powered by the new community mini-grid. For the first time, he watched the national evening news. For the first time, he saw President Traoré speaking directly to citizens like him. "This electricity," Mahamadou whispered, "is not just for light, it is for dignity." In Gorom, where desert winds whip endlessly through the plains, newly installed wind turbines complemented solar panels, creating hybrid microgrids. Elderly shepherds who once charged their phones at distant markets now watched their grandchildren FaceTime cousins in Wahiguya. Even the most remote clinics, once paralyzed by lack of refrigeration and lighting, began storing vaccines and performing nighttime births under reliable electric lamps. Midwife Juliette Zongo, who once delivered babies with a flashlight in her mouth, now operated in fully lit solar-powered wards. "This," she smiled, holding a newborn swaddled in light cotton, "is the revolution we were promised." The shift was not only technical, it was spiritual. In sermons and market stalls, at weddings and funerals, the phrase "nourrir notre lumière," nurture our light, had taken root, a national metaphor born from an electrical miracle. Of course, there were skeptics. Some questioned the sustainability, the cost, the pace. Others warned of overdependence on imported solar panels. But Traoré had an answer. Build the factories at home. Plans were already underway to create a domestic panel assembly plant, run by local engineers trained through vocational schools tied directly to these infrastructure projects. Each kilowatt generated, each village illuminated, served a deeper message. Burkina Faso would no longer beg for light, it would create it. And as the glow spread across the map, from rooftops in Bobo Dioulasso to clinics in Gawa, the mood of the nation began to shift. Not just hope, but agency. People didn't just feel rescued, they felt powerful. At the presidential compound, Traoré received a report. Electricity coverage had leapt from 18% to 62% in just 14 months. He nodded once and placed the file beside the next set of documents. Plans to expand digital infrastructure, launch e-learning platforms, and lay fiber optic cables in even the most remote corners of the country. Power had lit the path. Now it was time to walk it, toward knowledge, access, and opportunity. And deep in Cebu, as Isufu read under the light and his father watched the news, their neighbor connected an old laptop to a newly charged battery and opened a lesson titled, Learning to Code in Moray. The future was online. As night fell over Cebu and the boy Isufu studied by the gentle hum of his solar-lit lamp, something deeper stirred across Burkina Faso, a quiet revolution not just in power but in purpose. Electricity had sparked access. Now it was time to illuminate minds and heal bodies. President Ibrahim Traoré's vision for a transformed Burkina Faso extended far beyond infrastructure and lights. He knew that without health and education, roads would only carry the sick, and power would light empty classrooms. Projects 11 through 20, focused on hospitals, schools, vocational centers, and digital learning hubs, were the next pulse in this awakening nation. In a modest primary school in Dédougou, a teacher named Cabaret Odile stood at the front of a refurbished classroom, chalk in one hand, tablet in the other. She had taught in this village for 12 years, mostly under a leaky roof, with textbooks handed down from decades past. But today her students leaned over digital tablets, following lessons delivered in French, Moray, and Dioula. The devices were part of Project 13, Rural Digital Learning Hubs, which aimed to distribute over 200,000 tablets and create smart classrooms in 2,000 schools. A girl in the front row, Adama, tapped her screen, and the tablet read out her answer aloud. She beamed. "I didn't know learning could talk to me," she whispered. Odile smiled. "It speaks when we give it a voice." Just kilometers away, in a community clinic in Yako, midwife Sophie Compaoré placed her stethoscope on a young, expectant mother's belly. In the past, Sophie had worked without ultrasound, without blood pressure machines, without refrigeration for vaccines. But Project 15, Maternal and Child Health Modernization, had brought in not just tools, but training, power, and proper sanitation. Where once she feared nighttime deliveries in candlelit rooms, she now operated in sterile, solar-powered maternity. Wards with emergency backup systems and trained nurses assisting 24/7. "We used to survive childbirth," she told a visiting reporter. "Now we prepare for it with dignity." Under Project 11, new regional hospitals, 6 state-of-the-art hospitals were being built in underserved regions like Tenkodogo and Kaya, reducing the burden on Ouagadougou's overwhelmed central facilities. Project 12. Mobile medical units deployed solar-powered vans into the Sahel, reaching nomadic and displaced populations who had never seen a doctor. In the Ministry of Health, newly appointed Director Dr. Haruna Savadogo moved through color-coded dashboards displaying patient access rates, medicine supply levels, and digital medical records from rural zones. For the first time, national health policy wasn't reactive, it was predictive. And on the other side of the capital, the Ministry of Education was undergoing a similar rebirth. Learning, declared Minister Salimata Tambura, must be for everyone, everywhere, and every day. With her leadership, Projects 16 to 18 revamped hundreds of crumbling school buildings, created thousands of new teacher training slots, and ensured that every child, especially girls, had a desk, a uniform, and a path forward. One of those girls was Mariam, age 14, from a nomadic family in Arabinda. She walked 3 kilometers to a newly built middle school constructed under Project 17, Girls' Education Advancement Zones. Her father, once skeptical, now beamed with pride as she helped her siblings with homework under their home's new electric bulb. "She says she'll be a doctor," he said, "and now I believe her." While traditional schooling expanded, so did practical learning. Project 19, vocational training centers for youth employment launched across 30 provinces, teaching trades like solar panel installation, plumbing, coding, and agribusiness. In Bobo Dioulasso, a once unemployed youth named Jean-Pierre welded steel supports on the roof of a training center he now helped manage. "I used to wait for opportunity," he said. "Now I help build it." The backbone of these projects was Project 20, the National Education Health Integration Strategy, a unified data system connecting student records, medical checkups, and community progress metrics. It ensured that no child fell through the cracks due to illness, hunger, or displacement. These weren't just reforms, they were lifelines, and the results were already visible. Infant mortality dropped, literacy surged. School attendance, especially among girls, reached historic highs. And in villages like Gorsi, where no doctor had ever practiced and no computer had ever been seen, both now coexisted under the same solar-paneled roof. As President Traoré visited a new school outside Banfora, he was met by dozens of students in bright green uniforms, chanting his name, not as a political slogan, but as a thank you. He leaned down beside a girl writing on a tablet and asked what she wanted to be. "Minister," she said shyly. He laughed. "Mine or someone better?" "Better," she smiled. That night, as light spilled from schools and hospitals across the country, the president stood again at his window, watching the transformation he once dreamed of take form. The nation was learning. The nation was healing. But to truly rise, Burkina Faso needed to feed not only its people's minds and bodies, but also their economy. And far in the countryside, tractors rumbled to life, greenhouses lit up in the night, and irrigation canals opened, heralding the next wave of Traoré's bold plan, the agricultural revolution. As schools filled with students and hospitals glowed through the night, a deeper rhythm stirred beneath Burkina Faso's soil, the beat of tools striking earth, water gurgling through canals, and seeds embracing life. Education and health had laid the foundation, but now it was time to feed the nation, not with aid, but with abundance. For generations, Burkina Faso had suffered from food insecurity, unpredictable rains, and water scarcity. Farming, once the pride of the land, had become a gamble. But President Ibrahim Traoré believed that true sovereignty began with self-sufficiency. Projects 21 to 27, launched under the banner of Food, Water, and Freedom, set out to reclaim the land, and with it, the people's dignity. It began in the dry plains near Kupela, where a collective of 30 farmers gathered in the early morning light. Among them was Awa Sidibé, a mother of 4 who once relied on seasonal rain to keep her tiny peanut farm alive. Today, she stood before a solar-powered drip irrigation system installed as part of Project 21, Integrated Agricultural Irrigation Networks. Water flowed like veins into the field, feeding neat rows of tomatoes, onions, maize, and cassava. Awa reached down, felt the damp earth, and smiled. "I no longer pray for clouds," she said. "Now I manage my season." Nearby, young men and women loaded crates of produce onto electric trucks bound for the Zinyaré Regional Food Hub, built under Project 22. The hub, equipped with cold storage, packaging units, and digital inventory tracking, allowed farmers to preserve, process, and sell their goods at better prices. Gone were the days when crops rotted before reaching the market. Inside the facility, Jean-Claude, a 19-year-old cooperative leader, reviewed the day's shipments on a tablet. "Last year we shared our harvest with 4 villages," he said. "Now, we export to 6 regions. And next, maybe across the border." The ripple effect reached women's cooperatives in Gawa, where Project 23, Women's Agricultural Empowerment Zones, had funded land access, equipment loans, and financial training. Women who were once sidelined now led banana plantations, poultry farms, and beekeeping ventures. Salimata Drabo, a soft-spoken grandmother-turned-business leader, poured bottled honey into crates marked for Bobo Dioulasso. "They told us to wait for help," she said. "Now we hire others." In the Sahelian town of Djibo, where desert winds once claimed entire fields, the land now pulsed with life. Project 24, Climate-Resilient Farming Initiatives, introduced drought-resistant seeds and sustainable soil practices. Greenhouses sprouted under transparent roofs, buzzing with life. Water harvested from fog nets, a technique revived from ancestral knowledge. Filled tanks used to irrigate crops even during dry spells. Yet none of this could last without clean, reliable water. And for that, Project 25, rural and urban clean water access, moved like a silent miracle beneath the ground. In Manga, children crowded around a new community well, their buckets filling effortlessly. For the first time, they didn't have to walk miles for water that often made them sick. In Ouagadougou's outskirts, a sprawling water treatment plant pulsed under the sun, part of Project 26, National Water Grid Modernization. Taps now flowed in schools, clinics, and homes once abandoned during dry months. Elder Borema Zongo, seated under a baobab in the village of Toma, watched the harvest trucks pass and nodded quietly. His voice, cracked with age, still held strength. "There was a time," he said, "when we begged for food. Now we teach others to grow it." He pointed to the nearby field, where his grandson was tending mango saplings planted with government support. "We are not rich, but we are ready. That is freedom." Markets too were being reborn. Project 27, smart market modernization, transformed dusty, chaotic spaces into clean, solar-lit trading centers. Stalls were digitalized, prices standardized, waste minimized. In Wahigoya, women no longer fought for shady corners. Each had a licensed stall, refrigeration, and secure payments. In the bustling market of Tenkodogo, vendors used mobile apps to track inventory and earnings. An announcement came over loudspeakers. New produce from Kudugu had arrived, fresher and cheaper than imports. National demand was being met by national supply. Even those once displaced by insecurity found purpose in these projects. Internally, displaced persons, IDP camps outside Fada and Gourma, vegetable gardens had replaced food lines. Skills training empowered them to contribute to, not depend on, the system. This wave of agricultural renewal was not just about sustenance, it was about sovereignty. Each project rewove the social fabric of Burkina Faso, thread by thread, and as harvests multiplied, so did pride. In a broadcast address on National Agriculture Day, President Traoré stood among farmers, not officials. "We do not grow crops," he said, holding a handful of millet. "We grow strength. We grow unity. We grow a future no one can take from us." The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in song. Yet as the nation fed itself, another need emerged just as urgent: protection. For no matter how many crops grew or schools rose, Burkina Faso could not move forward if its people lived in fear. And so in remote northern territories and once abandoned outposts, a new kind of project was taking shape. One that would test courage, innovation, and unity more than any before. As the sun rose over Burkina Faso's newly irrigated farmlands and revitalized markets, the winds carried more than the scent of harvest. They carried the pulse of a people no longer surviving, but shaping. With food in their baskets and water in their wells, Burkinabe citizens now turned their gaze toward protection, innovation, and identity. The final 3 projects, 28 through 30, weren't just designed to serve the present. They were intended to sculpt the soul of a reimagined nation. In the northwestern province of Yako, once scarred by insurgency and displacement, a modern compound stood encircled by iron gates and satellite towers. Project 28, National Security Training Hubs, and initiative born out of necessity, focused not only on defense but community resilience. Here, soldiers trained alongside volunteer citizens, forest rangers, engineers, and first responders. Captain Aminata Konate, a former university student turned security leader, addressed a group of new recruits. "This is not about war," Shibai said. "This is about protection. For our farms, our schools, and our mothers walking to market." Nearby, women in headscarves learned emergency communication protocols, while drone pilots practiced identifying threats in remote terrain. Traoré's plan had redefined security, not as brute force, but as preparedness, ownership, and collaboration. Yet even with safety restored, there was a deeper hunger stirring in the hearts of Burkinabe youth, a hunger for invention. In the outskirts of Ouagadougou, Project 29, the Ouaga Tech Park unfolded like a digital dream. Glass buildings rose from red earth, solar canopies stretched above co-working labs, and servers hummed with algorithms written in 3 languages. Coders, startup founders, AI researchers, and app designers, all under 30, buzzed with ideas and ambition. Fatou Diallo, a 22-year-old robotics student, showcased a drone prototype used for crop monitoring. 3 years ago, I didn't even have electricity in my village, she said. adjusting her safety goggles. Now, I'm building tech that helps farmers like my grandfather. From fintech to green construction startups, Burkina Faso's youth were not waiting for handouts. They were creating solutions, using tools built in their own country, by their own hands. The global press, once dismissive, began to pivot. Headlines that once read, "Africa's poorest," now declared, "the Sahel's Silicon Valley." Analysts who doubted Traoré's leadership now asked, could Burkina Faso become a model for post-colonial resurgence? And yet, as futuristic as the nation's vision had become, Traoré insisted on anchoring that future in something eternal: identity. At the center of Bobo Dioulasso, under a canopy of sacred trees, Project 30, African cultural renaissance centers opened to the sound of drums and griot chants. Stone amphitheaters and digital heritage archives merged tradition with modernity. Young musicians recorded traditional rhythms with synthesizers. Grandmothers taught weaving techniques through virtual workshops. Sculptors molded the past into bold new forms. Children gathered beneath towering murals of Queen Yenenga, Sankara, and Frantz Fanon. A schoolboy recited, "We are not the shadows of Europe. We are the fire of Africa." President Traoré himself stood before a crowd of artists and elders during the center's opening. His words, broadcast across the continent, cut through generations of imposed silence. "We do not wait for help," he said. "We lead. We do not borrow dreams. We remember who we are." At every level, from field to factory, from village square to virtual lab, a new Burkina Faso was emerging. A nation not defined by scarcity, but by resilience. Not divided by tribal lines, but united in vision. In Fada Ngourma, a young boy named Issouf once hid under his bed during gunfire. Now, at 13, he attended a solar-powered school, helped his mother run a produce stand, and practiced coding every weekend. "I want to build games," he laughed, "where the hero speaks Moore." In Banfora, girls once kept from school were now debating in 3 languages, writing code, delivering presentations, stitching uniforms, and mapping stars. One girl, Rahinatu, held up a handmade sign at a youth festival. "I am not the future. I am now." The heartbeat of the nation had changed tempo. Pride moved through every handshake, every tool lifted, every line of poetry recited at a cultural event. No longer did Burkinabe youth dream of fleeing for opportunity. They dreamed of building it right here. At a final ceremony marking the completion of the 30th mega project, Traoré stood on a raised platform, surrounded not by military generals or international consultants, but by school children from every region. Behind him towered a sea of solar panels stretching across the new National Renewable Energy Park, gleaming like a mirror to the sky. A choir of children sang the national anthem. One by one, they passed Traoré the flag. He held it high. Then, in one fluid motion, he raised it above the massive energy grid, the truest symbol yet of a country no longer waiting in the dark. In that moment, cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and foreign dignitaries applauded. But the loudest cheers came from the people, not because they witnessed a miracle, but because they were part of it. As Traoré descended from the platform, a young girl reached out to him. He took her hand, and together they walked forward, across clean paths, past electric buses, beneath wind turbines spinning in the breeze of a land finally at peace with its past and brimming with its future. This is not a miracle. This is Burkina Faso.